Hi guys, Neil from the New Zealand Cheese School here again, and today I'm going to talk a bit about a little known and little discussed contributor to cheese flavour, and that is the fat and how that creates flavour. And it's through a strange little system known as lipolysis, which is the action of a lipase enzyme on the fat. So if we look at the first screen here, we can see that the fat in cow's milk, approximately 4.3%, goat's milk a little bit less, and sheep a little bit higher than both. They are the substances that are affected by the fat, and then the structure of fat is a little bit more complicated. If we look at a basic fat molecule, or not a molecule, but a globule, which is the round little ball that exists in milk, and it's protected by what's known as a fat globule membrane. And so it's protected from lipase, and it's fairly difficult for the lipase to attack whilst this membrane is intact. And if you think of a fat globule, think of a soft-boiled egg where you've got some liquid fat and some solid fat, and then a shell around the outside, which is the fat globule membrane. So, but inside this this membrane is the fatty substances or molecules, and we call them triglycerides. Now, there are many different types of triglycerides. On the left here, you see the glycerol molecule, which is the base, and attached to that is a fatty acid. Now, there are many fatty acids in milk. 3 fatty acids usually are attached to a glycerol molecule, so that's why it's called a triglyceride. And on the right-hand side, I've put a couple of examples of fatty acids that might be present on a particular base of glycerol: butyric acid, stearic acid, and oleic acid. And if you can look up the top, a stearic acid, it's quite a complex. There's 18 carbons in the chain. It's a long chain fatty acid. And butyric acid, the short one just underneath it, which has only got 4 carbons, sorry. So there are a lot of different fatty acids. Oleic acid, once again, has got 18 in the chain. So let's have a little brief look at some of the fatty acids and the differences between them. Typically, the fatty acids have got fairly complex names. They've got a fairly technical name, but we see that the 4-carbon chain one is butyric acid, 6-chain one, caproic. In technical terms, it's called hexanoic from the 6 chain. The 8 is octanoic, but we call them by these common names: caprioic, caprylic, and capric are the first, the 6, 8, and 10. And they are predominantly called that because if you look across at the right-hand side of the column, the goat's milk has got a fairly high concentration. And of course, goats are from the caprine species. So these fatty acids, common names, are typically because there's higher goat, they're higher in goat's milk, and so on. So I just wanted to highlight the particular one, capric acid, which is a pretty important one as far as flavour goes, differences between sheep, cow, and goat. So lipolysis, lipo, if you've probably heard of liposuction, it's basically fat suction. So lipo is another name for fat, and lysis is a name for breaking down. So it's fat breakdown or fat breaking down. If you have a bacteria that has lysis, the bacteria breaks down and it dies. So now, this occurs in pretty much all cheeses and creates flavour and contributes to flavour. Not all the flavour, but it creates some of the flavour of cheese. So lipolysis is when a lipase enzyme, now lipase, lip is the fat prefix, and ase is an enzyme suffix. So it's an enzyme that breaks down fat, and it breaks down the bond between those fatty acids and the glycerol molecule that I showed you before, and releases one of those fatty acids, those 3 fatty acids. It's released. And once it's released, it's known as a free fatty acid. So these create flavors, and I mean, these fatty acids can be also modified by bacterial organisms and so on, and produce other compounds, but a bit more of that later. So this is the schematic, a simple schematic of the lipase enzyme attacking the fat molecule, the triglyceride, and liberating the fatty acid to become free fatty acids. But the key thing is, when the fatty acids are all attached to the glycerol molecule, the flavor of the cheese is, flavor of the fat is fairly neutral. It doesn't have much flavor at all, nice creamy, buttery type flavor. But once it's released, then the flavor of each fatty acid is released, and they can be quite substantial. For example, butyric acid has a very, very strong aromatic component, which we often know as baby vomit. So the lipases, where do they come from? There are 3 different forms of lipases according to the source. Firstly, it's present in raw milk, and so it's known as a lipoprotein lipase. But unfortunately, for those cheeses where pasteurization is applied to the milk, those lipases are primarily removed to very significant effect. Then there is lipases that the cheesemaker can actually add to the milk. And these are extracted from pre-gastric sources, and they're called pre-gastric esterases, a fancy name for lipase. And then there are bacteria and molds, which are used in cheese making, which actually produce their own lipase. So those pre-gastric esterases, with the fancy name for lipase, they're extracted from, I believe, the epiglottis, which is a gland that it's in the base of the throat. And when the animal suckles over suckles milk from the mother, that stimulates the release of the lipase into the milk stream and helps break down the fat for the nutrition of the animal. But when these animals are slaughtered, which they often are, they have the lipase or the pre-gastric esterase extracted and purified, and the cheesemaker can actually blend these or use individual enzymes from different sources to create different flavors. So they might be used to modify cheeses, commonly cheeses such as the Romano, Provolone, sometimes feta, not very often, but sometimes feta, pecorino, and sometimes Parmesan. Parmesan doesn't need it if it's made from raw milk, because the raw milk will contain its own natural lipases. But if it's pasteurized, you may need to supplement the milk with a little bit of lipase, not very much, just to replace what pasteurization takes out. So the levels of lipase are varied according to the flavor needed and the intensity. So for Romano, for example, it can have quite a significant amount, and you get quite a significant flavor, which is often known as the sharp or piquant flavor of Parmesan, and it gives that maybe stronger baby vomit type flavor. So if we look at blue mold and white mold cheese, for example, then these cultures that are used, Penicillium roqueforti and for blue cheese, and Penicillium candidum for white mold cheese, they've got a fairly strong lipase system of their own. So you don't need to add any lipases even to pasteurized milk, because these organisms will create their own lipases when they multiply and grow on the cheeses or inside the cheeses in the case of blue. There's a couple of different lipases for Penicillium roqueforti, one that works at higher pHs and one at lower pHs. And for Penicillium candidum, one that works at sort of slightly better at above neutral. And these flavors that they produce, the ketones and other subsequent flavors are responsible for the blue cheese flavors. And in white mold cheese, there's a substance that's produced from the white mold and the lipase called octanol, and that's responsible primarily for the mushroomy type flavor of Camembert and Brie style cheeses. So in summary, lipase enzymes contribute to the flavor of many cheese through this action of lipolysis. So hope you've enjoyed that, and thank you very much. Cheers.